Hodor has only ever said one word in his entire life. And that one word brought down the internet. But there is something about Hodor that nobody ever explained to you. Not the show, not the books. And most people walking around today have no idea that it exists. His height, 7 feet tall. Huge. Built like a castle wall. And when you discover where that height actually came from, the whole story of Game of Thrones will never be the same again. The answer lies 100 years ago, with a hedge knight named Dunk. Let's begin with what we know for sure. In Game of Thrones, Hodor is first seen as the gentle giant stable boy at Winterfell. His true name in the series, as discovered in Season 6, is Willis. In the books, his name is Walder, but this was changed in the series to prevent confusion with the numerous Walders in the Frey family. He is part of the Stark family. He is the one who carries Bran around everywhere, and he is one of the most lovable characters in the entire series. However, his history is a complete enigma. We are never introduced to his parents. We are never given the reason for his gigantic size. What the show does tell us is that Hodor is the great-grandson of Old Nan. That is true in the books in A Game of Thrones, where George R.R. Martin says that it is very difficult to accept that someone as small and old as Old Nan could possibly be related to someone like Hodor. The book states it very clearly. Hodor was close to 7 feet tall, and Bran wonders to himself if Hodor would ever shrink down to the size of his great-grandmother when he was old. That is the connection. Old Nan is his great-grandmother. Everything else about his family, his parents, his grandfather, who his great-grandfather was, is a complete blank. And that blank is where this gets interesting. Now, let's talk about Ser Duncan the Tall. If you are currently watching the series, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms on HBO, then you already know Dunk. He is the tall, kind-hearted hedge knight from Flea Bottom in King's Landing. He had no family, no money, and no last name. He became a squire to a wandering knight named Ser Arlan of Pennytree, and after Arlan's death, he continued on his own. He took on a young boy named Egg as his squire, who turned out to be Prince Aegon Targaryen in disguise, and the two of them traveled the Seven Kingdoms causing trouble and doing good wherever they went. The first thing that defined Dunk, the first thing that everyone noticed about him, was his height. He was a giant, almost 7 feet tall, maybe taller, muscular and powerful. He was known as Ser Duncan the Tall because of it. It's literally his name. And he wasn't just tall in a way that would make him look menacing. He was tall in a way that would make people stop and stare. Knights in full armor had to look up to him. Lords had to look up to him. Everyone had to look up to Dunk. Now, let's hold that thought about his height. We're going to get back to it. This is where the story begins to progress towards Winterfell. George R.R. Martin has revealed that the 4th novella in the Dunk and Egg series, which he has been writing about for years, is actually set at Winterfell. He has said this several times. The story is titled The She-Wolves of Winterfell, and it involves Dunk and Egg traveling to the Stark family seat of Winterfell, where they become embroiled in some sort of succession crisis involving a number of Stark women, wives, widows, and daughters. This is the setting. This is where this trip to Winterfell occurs in the chronology, about 70 to 80 years before the Game of Thrones series. But let's consider the math. Old Nan is said in the books to be the oldest person at Winterfell, perhaps the oldest person in all of the Seven Kingdoms. Nobody knows exactly how old she is. Even Bran's father used to say that Old Nan had been old as long as he could remember, and his father before him. The book goes on to say that she originally came to Winterfell as a wet nurse for a young Brandon Stark, a boy who died at the age of 3, and she simply never left. This implies that she has been at Winterfell for a very, very long time. If Dunk comes to Winterfell about 80 years before Game of Thrones, and Old Nan is there as a young woman at that time, it all adds up. She would have been young enough to fall in love. Now, here is the evidence that propels this theory from interesting to almost irrefutable. In the book, A Dance with Dragons, the 5th book in the series, Bran Stark is in the cave with the three-eyed raven. He eats the weirwood paste, touches his hand to the tree, and begins to have visions. He sees Winterfell through the eyes of the heart tree at various points in time. He sees Starks from past generations. He sees kings. He sees battles. And in the midst of all these visions, George R.R. Martin puts this one sentence. Then there came a brown-haired girl slender as a spear who stood on the tips of her toes to kiss the lips of a young knight as tall as Hodor. Read that sentence again slowly. A young knight, at Winterfell, as tall as Hodor. Bran is having this vision through the Godswood. The Heart Tree is showing him actual events from Winterfell's past. And in this past, there is a knight so tall that the only way Martin can describe his height to the reader is by comparing him directly to Hodor, the one character in the current story that everyone already knows is a giant. That's not coincidental. George R.R. Martin doesn't put details like that in his books flippantly. He is one of the most intentional writers living. When he says that a knight is as tall as Hodor, he wants you to connect those dots. And a brown-haired girl, thin as a spear, standing on her toes to reach him. Old Nan, before she was old, would have been a young woman at Winterfell. She is never given a real name in the books. She is always simply referred to as Nan, or Old Nan. No one knows what she looked like when she was young. But a thin brown-haired girl at Winterfell, kissing a giant knight under the Heart Tree? That is the moment. That is the scene Martin planted in the books years ago, before anyone was paying attention closely enough. Now let's discuss why this is completely logical from a narrative standpoint. Old Nan is more than just a background character. She is the storyteller of Winterfell. She is the one who sits with the Stark kids and tells them stories of the Long Night, the White Walkers, the Children of the Forest, and the history of the world. And in these tales, she speaks of knights. Real knights who lived. Knights who actually existed. In the series, in Season 4, Episode 1, there is an instance where Joffrey is browsing through the White Book, which is the official history of every knight who ever served in the Kingsguard, and he comes across the entry of Ser Duncan the Tall. He reads that there are 4 full pages of his exploits and exclaims, in genuine surprise, he must have been quite a man. He is not making fun of Dunk. He is comparing Dunk to Jaime Lannister, whose entry is no more than a few lines. The idea is that the tale of Dunk was so important, so well known, that even a cruel and largely indifferent king, such as Joffrey, took notice. Now comes the question. How did Old Nan know so much about knights? How did a serving woman in Winterfell, an old woman, become the repository of all these tales? How did she know them so intimately, so deeply, that she could retell them to the Stark children, generation after generation, with such detail and passion? Because she met one. Because she loved one. Old Nan's tales are not simply legends she learned from books. They are also personal. They are the memories of a woman who actually lived through the history she relates. If she and Dunk had something when he came to Winterfell, something more than a friendship, something more than a passing interest, something that meant something to both of them, then her familiarity with him, her concern for his tales, and her love of telling them to children is absolutely understandable. She is not simply passing on stories. She is keeping him alive. Now, let's turn to the question of size, because this is really what blows people's minds. Hodor is close to 7 feet tall. He is gigantic. He is so much larger than everyone else that even the characters in the show comment on it. Old Nan, his great-grandmother, is small. The difference between them is so great that Bran, as a child, simply cannot help but notice it and be baffled by it. Where does his size come from? Dunk is also almost 7 feet tall. That is the explanation. If Dunk is Hodor's great-grandfather through Old Nan, then the height that has been passed down through the family line. That is not just an explanation, it is biology. Tall parents mean tall children. And in a family line where the great-grandfather is almost 7 feet tall, it is not at all out of the question that a great-grandson would also have that same characteristic, even if it skips a generation or 2 in between. In the series, when Osha first meets Hodor, she actually jokes about him maybe having giant blood. That is not an accident. That is a reference. That is George R.R. Martin telling you that this man's height has to have a biological explanation. Giant blood would be a perfectly good one. Now, let's introduce what George R.R. Martin has actually said in public, because this is where it gets serious. In 2016, at Balticon, the annual sci-fi and fantasy convention held in Baltimore, Martin did a live reading from The Winds of Winter, and at the same convention, he confirmed something that fans had been guessing for years. That Brienne of Tarth is a descendant of Ser Duncan the Tall. He confirmed this himself in public. The fact that Brienne is the descendant of Dunk is already a good theory because of her height, strength, morals, and most importantly, because in A Feast for Crows, Brienne discovers a shield in the armory of Lord Selwyn Tarth at Evenfall Hall, and that shield is Ser Duncan the Tall's original coat of arms. She doesn't know whose it is, but she paints it on her own shield anyway, and brings it to the Riverlands and Crownlands, unknowingly bringing the symbol of her own ancestor. Martin also used the same phrase when writing about both characters. Sarah Arlen's constant joke about Dunk is Dunk the Lunk, thick as a castle wall. And in A Storm of Swords, Jaime Lannister says the same thing to Brienne in the middle of an argument. Martin deliberately left it out in both cases. Martin, however, has also hinted at times that the descendants of Dunk are still alive during the events of Game of Thrones. There has long been a rumor among fans that Martin has indicated that at least 4 such descendants are alive in the world. Brienne is the only one he has directly confirmed. Hodor is a very strong suggestion from the text. The Clegane brothers, Sandor the Hound and Gregor the Mountain, have been suggested as possibilities based on their massive size, although this suggestion seems much less supported in the actual text. There have also been suggestions from fans of 2 brothers in the Night's Watch, Gren and Small Paul, who are both large, kind men with a similar sense of character to Dunk. None of these have been confirmed, but the Hodor one is different. The Hodor one has a direct bit of textual evidence to support it, that vision in A Dance with Dragons. The others are just suggestions based on size and character. Hodor has a scene. Let's also address the small counterargument that sometimes gets raised. Some readers have done timeline analysis and wondered whether the dates quite work out perfectly for Old Nan to be young enough when Dunk comes to Winterfell. But here is the thing. The books themselves state that Old Nan sometimes told the same tale in different ways. Whether the young Brandon Stark she nursed was Lord Rickard's brother, his father's brother, or his grandfather's brother varies depending on which version of the tale she was telling on any given day. She is not a trustworthy narrator on matters of her own personal history, and she is also described as being older than anyone can remember. The timeline is intentionally vague. George R.R. Martin intentionally left holes in it. And also, even if the actual year of Nan's arrival at Winterfell does not match up with the known visits of Dunk, it does not disprove the theory. Dunk accompanies Maester Aemon to Eastwatch by the Sea at some point in his later years, and the path north would have almost certainly taken him through or past Winterfell. He has several reasons to be in the north throughout his life. The window for a meeting was not a moment. Now, let's take a step back and consider what this means for the story as a whole. This is not just a trivia connection. This is George R.R. Martin doing what he does better than almost anyone, hiding meaning inside the structure of the story. Consider what Dunk and Hodor have in common besides their size. Both of them are gentle. Both of them are physically powerful, but emotionally soft. Neither of them wanted to hurt anyone. Dunk spent his entire career trying to be a true knight in a world that was cruel and political and corrupt. He was the kind of knight who stepped in when innocent people were being harmed, even when it cost him everything. And Hodor spent his entire life carrying Bran, protecting him, being loyal to a boy who could not walk. Both of them were built like weapons. Both of them used that size to protect rather than destroy. And then there is how they both died. Dunk died at Summerhall, the great tragedy of the Targaryen dynasty, when his old squire Egg, now King Aegon V, attempted to hatch dragon eggs, and the fire killed nearly everyone within the castle walls. Martin has stated in interviews that Dunk died as he lived, saving others. He went into the fire to try to pull others out. He died protecting others. That is who he was. Hodor held the door. He stood in a doorway with a horde of whites trying to push through, and he held it long enough for Bran and Mira to get away. He was no soldier. He was no trained fighter. He was a stable boy with the mind of a child. But he used his massive body as a shield, just like his grandfather before him, and he gave his life so that another might live. Both of them died for others. Both of them faced something terrifying and did not run. Both of them were too big, too gentle, and too good for the world they were born into. If Hodor is the great-grandson of Dunk, then that moment in the cave of the three-eyed raven is one of the most quietly beautiful things George R.R. Martin has ever put down on paper. Bran, in this vision, is unknowingly watching the moment that started it all, the young knight kissing the girl at Winterfell, without realizing that the giant who carries him on his back every single day is the direct result of that kiss. He is staring directly at the origin story of his best friend, and he doesn't know it. This is the kind of writing that makes you put a book down and just sit there. And so, here is where we are. Hodor was more than a gentle giant who appeared out of nowhere in Winterfell one day and happened to be really, really big. Hodor was the living legacy of one of the most noble knights to ever set foot in Westeros. His size was no accident. His gentleness was no accident. His absolute dedication to protecting someone who couldn't protect himself? Not an accident. It was legacy. 2 giants. 1 bloodline. 1 story. And it has been hiding in the text this whole time. If this broke your brain even a little bit, drop a comment below telling me which part got you. And share this with someone who loves Game of Thrones, because they deserve to know this too. And if you are new here and you want more deep dives like this into the things Game of Thrones and A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms never explain out loud, subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.